America. What's on my mind when I say loudly and boldly, together America? Statesman Benjamin Franklin advised during the quest for American independence, and this is his quote: "We must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly, we will all hang separately." It's amazing how that holds true today, especially in the times that we find ourselves in. Let me take it a step farther. President George Washington's farewell address warned against political parties as what? Engines of divisions. He went on to say that they serve to organize faction, to give it an artificial and extraordinary force to put in the place of the delegated will of the nation, the will of a party, often a small, think about this, often a small but artful and enterprising minority of the community. And according to the alternate triumphs of different parties, to make the public administration the mirror of the ill-concerted and incongruous projects of faction, rather than the organ of consistent and wholesome plans digested by common councils and modified by mutual interest. Is this not a telltale sign of the America that we find ourselves in today? Donald Trump said recently that if he doesn't win the November election, it's an end to American democracy. Joe Biden said if Donald Trump wins the White House, it's the end to America as we know it. You know, we talk about terrorists. We talk about how the Chinese and the Russians use their propaganda machine. We talk about this massive immigration that continues on our borders. And everybody keeps saying, you have ISIS, you have Hezbollah, you have these terrorist cells in the United States. And everyone is wondering, when will they show themselves? Well, maybe they're calculating that on November 5th, whether Trump wins or Biden wins, America could find itself in a civil war. And you better believe that our enemies would hope for something just like this, that it would just, America would turn into turmoil. Don't you think that would be the perfect time for them to exploit our wounds, our dissension, and our chaos? Think about it. And that's why I say this. At the end of the day, no matter what happens on November 5th, America must be together. We cannot allow an election to destroy us and push us into chaos. Carrie, Sheffield, Sal Greco, and Leonard. Sal, you understand how our enemy exploit our wounds and our dissension. It is almost, it would be the perfect storm if we're not together.
I completely agree with you. But when either candidate state that the country will be at a boiling point, you have to understand, Armstrong, that it's the fringe part of what we're talking about. They're radicals on each side. These are the people that you would consider want a quote-unquote civil war or something like that. And, you know, over 300 years almost, we've had elections all the time, and people get elected, reelected, they lose. There hasn't been anything, right? Because it's just that's the way this democratic process works. You know, to say there's going to be a civil war or the country's going to be boiling, you know, I understand people are going to be upset. There might be some, you know, rhetoric out there, a little, you know, strong rhetoric. But again, it goes down to the fringe parts of both sides of the aisle, because I just can't see after what happens, unless there's something that happens, like it could be a war that happens, you know, with Joe Biden and right now we have Gaza and Israel, you have Ukraine and Russia, and if something like that happens, maybe something, boils over into the country because it's World War III. Other than that, it's just going to be, an election, and whoever wins. Hopefully the candidate that I like wins or you like. So, that's the best you can hope for. But that kind of rhetoric, that needs to be toned down, because civil war, it's basically fringe groups or the radicals on each side that would push for something like that. It's a small minority, not the majority.
Leonard Snipes, I just read a PBS Marist poll where about 19% of the people that they surveyed saying that violence and going against even the rule of law would be necessary if we don't get the kind of elected official in this November election, because they're led to believe that if either candidate were to win, it's the end of America. And sometimes to gain back our country, this poll reflected that some people believe that violence could be the only solution.
Look, Armstrong, we have been through much worse in the United States. We have been through a civil war. We have been through a world war. We have been through a Great Depression. We have been through multiple depressions, multiple recessions, and America has always bounced back. It is amazing to me that we've been through slavery. We have been through, doing right before the Great Depression, right before the Second World War, we had an American Nazi party. We had an American Socialist Party. We wanted nothing to do with the Second World War. We've been through much worse than this. So I'm not the least bit concerned about America becoming involved in a civil war. What I am concerned about is the safety of citizens, and I am concerned about them feeling safe. That's the most important thing to me. And at the moment, per Gallup, we are at record fear of crime. We're also, in terms of crime statistics, some of the largest crime increases in the history of the country. That's per the National Crime Victimization Survey from the U.S. Department of Justice. So my concern is people being safe and feeling safe. We're not headed towards a civil war. We've been through much worse.
Carrie, we have no idea where our enemies who have come across our borders, where they are. You have no idea what the Russian and Chinese propaganda machine will be putting out. When we have these conversations, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to come from Americans. It's going to come from people inside of America who could sort of become sort of like the impetus for this. I just think that sometimes you need to talk about it, that no matter what happens at the end of the day, it has to be together America, no matter what happens with the political class.
I agree, because at the end of the day, politics is downstream from culture. And so if we are so divided by our culture, our politics and our policy will flow from that, and it will be broken. If we've got a broken culture, we're going to have broken policy and broken politics. So I think, to the historical point, as my colleague here on the panel has mentioned, I think it's important to note that what's happening, I believe, in our country right now, we are having psychological warfare. Our national security apparatus has noted this, from the Chinese to the Russians, to pit us against each other and to turn us against ourselves. So we have the record suicide levels. We haven't seen this high of suicide levels since 1941. We have never seen as high depression levels as we have now. So we are awash in mental illness and suicide. And a lot of it has to do with social media. A lot of it has to do with the continuation of the psychological impacts of COVID-imposed isolation. So we need to recover our mental health. And I know you and I talk a lot about this, Armstrong. A big part of that that's proven in the science is through spirituality, through faith community. And unfortunately, especially for young people, they are becoming less religious, less spiritual. And that's why they have, according to the science, they're also having the highest rates of suicide. So we've got to solve our problems internally. And that's, I think, where the biggest threat is.
Leonard, given your analysis and the data at your disposal, can you clarify the current trends in crime rates and what this indicates about the national state of our security in our communities?
Armstrong, it's going to take a bit of time. You have the National Crime Victimization Survey, which measures all crime throughout the United States. It goes back 50 years, and there was a certain point where the criminological community demanded the National Crime Victimization Survey as being far more important than crimes reported to law enforcement that are reported by the FBI. from the National Crime Victimization Survey, the latest official report from the U.S. Department of Justice is that violent crime went up 44%. It was released in 2023. It's for the year 2022. The vast majority of crime is not reported to law enforcement. That's why we have the National Crime Victimization Survey. So let's say 80% approximately of what we call crime is property crime. Only 32% of that 80% is reported to law enforcement. Only 42% of violent crime is reported to law enforcement. So everybody's quoting FBI statistics. Nobody's quoting National Crime Survey statistics. They're ignoring the official position from the U.S. Department of Justice at the moment. But if you go back to 2023, the FBI has come out in record time, and there are some significant decreases in crimes reported to law enforcement. So that confuses people. They're saying, hey, you're talking about crimes reported to law enforcement versus the National Crime Victimization Survey. One showing a huge increase and the other is showing a decrease in terms of 2023. President Biden said that, I think he was referring to homicides when he said that it's the lowest since in the last 50 years. And there was a significant decrease in homicides in 2023. These are unofficial statistics. They're preliminary statistics, and we won't know the final statistics until the fall, this coming fall. For 2023. So at the moment, we have conflicting data. We have crimes reported to law enforcement. Again, the vast majority of crimes are not reported to law enforcement. They indicate for the latest year that they have data, preliminary data, that crime is going down. The interesting thing is that those decreases are principally outside of metropolitan areas. Inside of metropolitan areas, those decreases are not as strong. So you have two conflicting pieces of data. It all depends upon what kind of data you want to look at. You can look at other ways of looking at it from the CDC. Again, crime, according to Gallup, is at the highest. Fear of crime is at the highest levels. There's a variety of statistics that you can take a look at that indicates the degree of the crime problem in the United States. By my estimation, 75 million Americans every year. By Gallup's estimations, more than half of American households on a yearly basis. If you include cybercrime and identity theft, we have a crime problem, and we have a fear of crime problem. And unless we admit to that, we're not doing justice to or by the American people.
Carrie, Sheffield, Sal Greco, Leonard Snipes, and later in the show, Lora Ries will join us to talk about this ever out of control issue of the mass immigration across our borders. I'm Armstrong Williams. We'll be back. And welcome back. You know, Sal, from your extensive experience on the streets with the New York Police Department, how does the reality of crime levels you witness contrast with what's going on in this country today and what the media and the public narratives also tell us?
Well, what's funny is Leonard was actually hitting a point about everything. So when we look at crime statistics, which are coming out of New York, and just the other day we had this dog and pony show with the entire upper management, the NYPD, and Mayor Eric Adams there. Now, they're showing you these stats. Now, what's really happening here is crime is actually, they just released their stats. So the FBI received some numbers, but they just changed these numbers now after the FBI released their report, and crime was actually up. And Eric Adams talks about the perception of crime, which versus the reality of it. But here's the thing, and he says he is correct about one thing, that recidivism seems to be the problem. But local DAs do not prosecute people, so people don't report certain crimes. Why? Because they realize that if they do, the guy will be arrested and be released immediately after because of the bail reform laws and the no cash bail laws. These were things that were implemented by Governor at the time Cuomo, and now Kathy Hochul as the governor of New York State. So these things strongly affect what Eric calls a perception, because the perception in reality is that crime is really skyrocketed in New York under his watch in the last 2 years. And they could play around with the numbers all they want. But Armstrong, back in my day, which was long before, Eric Adams took over as under Mayor Bloomberg, crime was almost at a record low. Why? Cops were allowed to do their job. DAs actually prosecuted people. It wasn't what we see now, it's a revolving door. And the judges were allowed to hold somebody based on their history or propensity to recommit another crime, recidivism, which is what Eric Adams was stating. So the other day's Dog and Pony show that they put out there, they don't want to mention these things. So that the perception versus reality, which is what Eric Adams keeps talking about. In reality, people go on the transit, go on the trains there in New York, and they see emotionally disturbed people like they saw a couple of weeks ago where there's a shooting. A guy got shot in the head. He was trying to shoot another guy because he claimed that he was a cop, and the other guy was an illegal immigrant. At least that's what he was claiming, and he was stabbed. These are the incidents that are occurring a lot more in New York City. And I understand that they're putting more cops out there, but people in New York are afraid. They're actually moving. There's articles about this. I just saw one about housewife. One of these people that are on these reality shows was stating they're leaving New York because they're afraid. And that's what you're battling. It's the perception versus reality. But like I said, Leonard has the numbers right in front of me, right in front of him. And some of those numbers were actually skewed by the police department in New York City because the crime was actually higher than what they reported to the FBI in December.
Carrie, you're an expert when it comes to the media relations. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions the public has about crime rates, and how can more accurate information be effectively in communicating this? Because think about this. When you say crime is down, and you say, well, crime is down because homicides are down, but there's a certain demographic that is not as impacted by homicides as they are by carjackings, car theft, having someone just go in and just plunge in their stores and rob at will, knowing they're not going to be held accountable. We see this going on in New York. In New York now, I watched this on video where somebody just walks up to a woman and just punch her in the head for no reason at all. Those are kinds of crimes that homicide may have an impact, but somebody punching you just because you're a woman has a greater impact on you, and these things are not discussed. So when you say crime is down, you say what crime is down and for whom? Because that crime has less of an impact on my daily goings than that crime.
You're absolutely right. And unfortunately, I'm sad to report that that actually happened to my sister. It was during the de Blasio years. She was living in Brooklyn, and she was almost murdered by someone who came up behind her. A man came up and punched her, he was doing the disgusting knockout game. And she fell and had to get multiple stitches in her head. And if she'd fallen a different way, or if he had punched her a different way, it could have been a much worse outcome. And she ended up moving to the Upper West Side from Brooklyn. She was terrified. And now she moved to the Midwest and has completely left New York. I left New York for similar reasons, too. I felt unsafe. I was in the New York area for almost a decade, and I now live in Arlington, Virginia. I'm not in D.C. because D.C.'s having its own crime issues, too. I had a friend who had all 4 tires stolen just right off the street, picked clean. And so it's, I think it's important, like you said, you can't cherry pick certain statistics that you want to highlight, because people, they believe their lying eyes. And that's why we're seeing this massive migration to states like Florida and to Texas, where the law enforcement authorities take crime more seriously and where they're not afraid to hold criminals accountable. But again, I want to go back to the root cause of this, which I believe is a moral and spiritual crisis, that is what's causing this perpetual increase in these behaviors. And it's also, as well, our school system and the lack of school choice that, I have a recent book that, Armstrong, we talked about. I have a whole chapter in there about my experience going to inner city schools in middle school. They were predominantly Black. It was the first school district in the entire nation to lose their accreditation. And when you walk in, you feel like you're walking into juvenile detention. You're treated like you're a juvenile delinquent, and that's in school. And so, of course, it becomes a school to prison pipeline because we treat them like criminals in the schools instead of allowing them to escape and get a lifeline out into a better environment where these kids will be treated with respect and they will be treated like human beings and not like cattle or like criminals.
You know, Sal, we had Pastor A.R. Bernard on during the Easter weekend, and he said something that so resonates with me. I not really thought about it deeply. He said this thing we talk about that we call love, when we have the consistent crime and what these youth are able to get away with. I was talking to my brother this morning. He talked about this little old lady in her 80s, went into the grocery store and she had to pull out her money. And these kids just followed her all the way to her home, beat her, took her money. They just beat old people. We don't even talk about how vulnerable senior citizens, we're talking about people in their 70s and 80s and 90s, beat them down, break their legs, punch them in the face. And it's true, when you see this over and over again, and it seems like law enforcement does nothing about it, the thing you call love and feelings, you almost lose your humanity for these people. You listen, I have conceal and carry. I know many of you have conceal and carry, but you know, I actually go, and this is sad for me to say, and I got to use myself as an example. I actually, for my own sanity, and we have media, we can respond immediately. For my own sanity, I go and type in on YouTube, show me videos where criminals get punched down or shot. They get due justice right immediately, because I need to know that all these criminals are not getting away with these crimes. Every now and then, I know that karma catches them immediately. And if it's happening to me and I talk to other people, people are sick of this crime. Sal?
Yeah, I think Carrie has a point that there is spiritual. It is something involved in that nature with some of these vile attacks. And I mean, but the problem again, Armstrong, is just the other day, this poor woman walks out of her house and gets her jaw wired shut by some maniac. He gets arrested, and then the DA of Brooklyn, who I happen to know, I actually worked under at one point, and I had many cases, Eric Gonzalez, doesn't hold him and calls this, he says this is an assault 3, which is a misdemeanor, instead of an assault 2, which is a felony, because I believe the intent was serious physical injury. They said no. They downgraded it at the DA's office. Guess what? Now she's in fear of her life because she goes home, and outside the window, she sees the same guy who's a loose cannon right outside across the street staring at the building. So why is this not being taken more serious? And again, these laws that they put in where it's bail reform, no cash bail, he doesn't fall under these certain guidelines they have, and they let him right back out. It's a revolving door. And he's seeing that in many jurisdictions, not just New York. New York's just the shining hill, the city on the shining hill, as Ronald Reagan once called it. So they're all following their lead. So New York it's usually the criminal over the law-abiding citizen, unfortunately, in New York. And Eric Adams is a prime example where, you know, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth, and he can't tell you can't get a straight answer from the guy. And he has his own problems with his own investigation against him. It's just one big mess in New York City.
So, Leonard, who's fighting? Where are the laws that's fighting for everyday Americans who wants to follow the rule of law, who are decent, they just want to go about their lives? They have enough issues that they deal with on a daily basis. So the last thing they need to deal with is a carjacking, someone snatching my purse, somebody punching me, somebody breaking in my home, and yet the person's put back out on the street 2 days later. I mean, do we understand what vigilante justice is? Do you know people are going to reach a certain boiling point until it's going to backfire? People are just not going to take it. They're just not.
That's my fear. That's my fear. My fear is, you know, Pew came out with a survey this morning talking about what Americans truly do believe in, and the rule of law. Equal justice is something that 90% of Americans believe in. But justice itself, if the American public doesn't feel that the government can keep them safe, then they're going to start going out and doing what they're doing now, which now we have record ownership of firearms. Is that in our best interest? I'm not going to say one way or the other, but that's what's propelling it per the data, because people are buying firearms like crazy because of fear of crime. They're doing lots of stuff regarding fear of crime. But yet, I look at survey after survey, interview after interview, article after article, where the people being interviewed make fun of the fact that the people in the United States have such a high fear of crime. They literally do make fun of them, as if Americans are stupid or childish or not being realistic, because according to FBI data, preliminary data, crime is down, and down substantially, not necessarily in cities or metropolitan areas, but in non-metropolitan areas. In other words, what we have to do is to hold criminals accountable. That's the bottom line. And since the pandemic, and also, unfortunately, since the protest in terms of police use of force, we have had a disabling of the criminal justice system, and we've had a disabling of law enforcement. The stats are very clear that arrests are down, and down considerably since 2015, when all of this began, and even went down even more during and immediately after the pandemic. So at the moment, we have an issue of accountability. At the moment, we have criminal offenders who believe that they can get away with what it is that they're doing. And guess what? They are getting away with what it is they're doing. Arrests are down, crimes solved are down. We have to hold people accountable if we're going to regain not only a sense of safety, but overall safety. And until we agree to do that, nothing's going to change.
Leonard, it's always a pleasure speaking to you. We always appreciate the great research that you sent us on these crime stats. I know Carrie and Sal is going to stay with us, and Lora Ries is joining us upon returning, but we always are grateful to have you on. Thank you for the great work you do.
Thank you, Armstrong.
And we'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. It's fascinating. It's always a pleasure to have our immigration expert, Lora Ries, on this show. What is the latest on the borders?
Well, it's continuing to be the crisis that it has been. The numbers are going to increase. We had a slight dip in February. The numbers seem to have gone back up in March. But as foreigners around the world know that President Biden is not likely to win the election in November, we are going to see a rapid increase of people racing to get into the U.S. before January 20th. So that's what we should expect.
What do you think are the most pressing challenges at the U.S. border today? And how do you propose we address them to ensure both security and our own safety? Do you concern yourself with what we've let in this country? Because we know most people want to come here to escape persecution. We understand that. But there are a lot of people that have come across our borders are just sitting waiting for instructions.
Right. We have to be concerned with the 1.9 million of known gotaways who have already come into the U.S. They purposely evaded the Border Patrol. They gave up that free plane ticket or train ticket or bus ride to anywhere they wanted to go into the U.S. because they are either known or suspected terrorists or they have criminal convictions. And that's the population we have to be worried about, and yet it just grows. And it seems every day now we learn of new crimes by illegal aliens who were encountered by Customs and Border Protection, but the Biden administration has directed that they be released into the U.S. And so now we're seeing the effects of that on a weekly, sometimes daily basis, where Americans are being harmed, other migrants are being harmed due to rape, murder, theft, the crimes you've been talking about on this show. This is the result of letting in millions of people, not vetting them, and releasing them into the U.S.
You know what's interesting, Sal, you know firsthand how drug dealers use our youth to shield them from law enforcement. But what many people are not talking about now is how they're now using immigrants to shield them and protecting them from law enforcement.
Yeah, I actually was just thinking about what she said. And I don't know if you remember very recently, there was a TikTok guy, I guess a Venezuelan, I don't know if he's a gang member or not, and he was showing his fellow illegal immigrants and undocumented how to come to America and basically squat in people's houses. And we could call it squatters. I say it's a burglary, but you could take it how it is. But he actually was telling these people how to do this. So he's basically, wants crime to occur in this country. So then they finally make a move on this guy, and he was hiding out in Ohio, and he was crying, and I saw him with his baby in the hand. And Ohio State Police said, we can't do anything, we can't find him. Within 24 hours or 48 hours, Armstrong, Homeland Security picked him up. So that shows me that when they want, they can actually grab these undocumented, especially that are part of, I guess they're coming from Venezuela. They might be part of this gang that's out there. And yes, what was he doing? They found that he was selling drugs and guns. He's a gun runner from down south in Venezuela coming up through the Mexican border. So these are the kind of people that are slipping through the cracks. I'm pretty sure he just walked over, nobody saw him coming, him and his cohorts, and now they're all over the country. And this is the chaos that's going on underneath this current administration that's in D.C. right now, with the head of it who doesn't know whether he's awake, if he's sleeping, he's shaking people's hands that don't exist off the stage. So as long as this goes on, Armstrong, I see like maybe 1 million more of these people coming to the country before to be an election. And that could really spell many future problems in many different states.
A couple different thoughts. One, Venezuela. So yes, some can just evade the Border Patrol and come into the U.S. But the Biden administration has also designed multiple programs for Venezuelans and other nationals to mass parole them into the U.S., fly them directly into the U.S., or give them temporary protected status if they are already here. We also just had a report of a number of squatters, Venezuelans in New York City across from a school. They had drugs, they had guns in the house, and they're being released back onto the street. Now, why does the left get to keep saying that they are anti-gun and that they want to take away our gun rights, and yet they do nothing about these criminals that they are finding with guns in the house? And finally, this squatting issue. This is a growing trend. When millions have come in and they are not going to all be sheltered, you've got veterans suffering. Veterans' homes are being turned over to aliens, hotels, schools, you name it. This homelessness problem is going to grow. And when you have also an increasing crime element and people just getting more brazen about the crimes that they commit, yes, we have this illegal alien instructing on TikTok, find vacation homes, find really nice homes, go in and take over the house. This is going to be a growing problem. And when it comes to personal property, you are going to have Americans really angry and responding to this. And woe to the elites who think they don't have to face this problem. Their homes are going to be the ones that are taken over.
And guess what? They know where to go and squat. Because they wouldn't come to my house and squat. That's not going to happen with me. They're not going to go to the Deep South. They know they go to these exact liberals who think they have all this compassion. They do the research and they squat these homes. Carrie, I sometimes, you get so mad. I just get mad about it when I hear it. It just does something to me. Because you would ask yourself this question: is this America? Really?
That's what I'm saying. The squatting thing is a problem. It's, to me, Armstrong, these are crimes that are not reported. It's a burglary. You are coming to my house that I own, that I may not be there for a certain amount of days, and all of a sudden you come back and you have a family of squatters or wherever they're from, Venezuela, who, by the way, on the side are also dealing drugs and guns, because that's what this gentleman was doing. He's not talking to all the immigrants that are seeking shelter, or seeking asylum. He's talking to his fellow gang members. That's what he's doing. They are letting all the gang members loose out of Venezuela. And Joe Biden and his administration, who's letting this happen, they're not vetting anyone. Armstrong, that's the point of the board. He's supposed to vet people so someone like this doesn't come to the country and commit chaos. I mean, look at New York. She's right. They didn't even prosecute those people. Let them right back out. We don't even know who they are. You don't know who they are, Armstrong. They got guns and they're selling drugs to our kids, to other people, while the homeless sit there and they don't even have a place to stay. They're sleeping in the streets still, because Eric Adams, he's really the mayor for the illegal aliens. That's who he really likes.
Carrie?
Well, yeah, I just came back from Brooklyn, where I met a woman who's now going to be the Brooklyn chair for our chapter of Independent Women's Network. She and her colleagues in her neighborhood are furious because apparently the Eric Adams administration has decided to put an illegal immigrant holding pen for adult males right down the street from a school of young children. And she reported that they require a metal detector to go through and screen these illegal immigrants, which suggests that they're worried about weapons. And to have them near these children, the families are protesting. The parents are up in arms about it. It's dangerous. And so, it was telling what you said, Armstrong, about these families who claim to be so compassionate, but you saw that with Martha's Vineyard. I thought that was such a telling hypocrisy by Ron DeSantis when he puts them in Martha's Vineyard. Do they keep them there? Oh, no, we can't have that type here. They ship them right out. And that's the heartbeat of liberal culture at Martha's Vineyard, the liberal elites. They don't want any part of that. So it's always for someone else to handle. And so I think that's been the brilliant part of the governor of Texas and Florida, to say this is a national problem. This is a national crisis.
How does, Lori, the topic of immigration and border security intersect, let's just say, with the broader work, and what solutions do you see for the polarized debate surrounding these consistent issues that we talk about?
Well, it's number one issue for Americans right now. I mean, poll after poll, this is beating out the economy in many instances, and it's because people want to be safe, and they no longer feel safe, and they are connecting the dots between an open border and the rising crime that results from that. So in terms of solutions, we have to seal the border. Unfortunately, Congress had a great opportunity to defund a lot of these Biden operations, and they blew it. They fully funded him, not only through the end of this fiscal year, but in some cases through 2025, binding the next administration. But every opportunity, Congress should not be funding these operations. The non-governmental organizations that carry this out, paying off the sanctuary cities that house this and tolerate this and push out Americans onto the street. We need policy changes. We need a lot of internal enforcement. If Joe Biden's going to bring in 10 million people in 3 years, we need mass deportations and send these people home and start putting Americans first.
We'll be right back after this, our short commercial break. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
So, with your expertise, Lora, in border security and immigration, what innovative strategies can our country employ to enhance border security while also fighting legitimate immigration?
So we have to deal with the masses that have come in first during Biden and secure the border. So in terms of the deportations, as we talked about before, ICE, DHS is very good at finding these people. So the handcuffs need to be taken off of ICE and off of DHS and let the federal agents do their job. Find these people, detain them, and remove them. That sends a signal to future people who would want to come here illegally. They won't get in and they won't get to stay. Don't bother. Don't waste your life savings coming here. In terms of securing the border, same thing. Let these border agents turn these people back, not process them north into the U.S. Go back to successful programs like Remain in Mexico, where if someone's going to claim asylum, they can do it, but they're going to stay in Mexico to do it. And have those safe third country agreements with countries to the south, where if you're going to claim suddenly that you have a fear of going home when you get to the U.S., but you didn't say you were afraid through the multiple countries that you traversed, you're going to go back to that first safe country and pursue asylum there. When we did that during the Trump administration, many people said, forget it, I'm just going to go home, because I don't want to apply for asylum in Guatemala. They were country shopping. And so you have to prevent that from occurring.
Sal, let me give Ron DeSantis much respect, because he recently passed a squatters law in Florida. They will not be going to Florida, okay? Not happening there. And I'm certain other governors will follow suit. Because to me, that is not even a left or right issue. That's just common sense. That's just to protect not only Americans, but these squatters who may go into the wrong house and find themselves a part of the body count in a morgue. That's just the reality of it, okay? Because some people can't not navigate and understand you walking in your house and you've got strangers in there. They lose it. Not everybody's the same in this country. But what is it like for law enforcement today? I mean, what is it really like?
Well, I remember in my time, Armstrong, many of the people that I actually incarcerated were actually undocumented. They were all like to drive drunk. That's one of these things they also like to do, is driving while intoxicated. And our problem was we weren't allowed to, they have ICE detainers on, and we can't cooperate with ICE, because this is something that goes back many years ago in New York City, where they put this law in where they don't deport people, they don't notify ICE for things, because they re-implemented this during my time on the job. So all these people have been arrested 5 different times, have different names. And listen, I'm not talking about the mom and her kids, because I know these liberals love to go back to that. I'm talking about men that come here and commit crimes, and they have 5 or 6 different names, and they keep getting arrested using their different names. They flip-flop them around, and then nothing happens. You just see them they get incarcerated. They're only incarcerated for one night. They come back out, and they'll do it again. Or they get DWI. They have 2 or 3 of them, and nobody ever puts them in jail for a long time, because then they would go to ICE. That's how it happens, because they'll get deported, but they don't want that. So New York City has this law with the right to shelter, and they're supposed to house all these undocumented. But the problem here was the law and the case law they're using, Armstrong, shows documented people. So it's supposed to be that only documented homeless people get sheltered. Who in the mayoral administration, I'm going back decades too, said that now they have to house everyone? And Eric Adams, who challenged this and then made a deal with the Legal Aid Society, and it didn't favor the city at all, never challenged it. No one as a mayor has challenged it, saying this law says we have to house documented people. Where does it say undocumented? Seeking asylum. Where does it say that? Because that was never the law, Armstrong. So these are things that could easily be challenged, and they could also try to implement new law where they cooperate with ICE, but they don't. And I don't know if this is a liberal agenda or some radical agenda or whatever it is, but simple things like that would change the course, because law enforcement would love to do their job. And regular men, in the rank and file, the men and women that work there can easily handle this if you take the handcuffs off of them.
You know, before I go to Carrie, talk about this homeless situation. This is a very precarious situation for our country.
It is. We've got shelters now that have been completely exceeded, and so now people are being pushed out onto the street. When we have a very bad economy in the U.S., there are far too many homeless Americans as it is, including vets, and this is just going to come to a head. Now that Biden has been fully funded for the rest of the year, this pipeline does not stop. The flow will continue, and so that's just going to put more people out onto the street, and I think we're going to see protests from this. This could become like the riots we saw in 2020 leading up to that election. This is going to be a real problem, and keep your eye on Chicago, where the Democratic National Convention is going to be this summer. They are sheltering aliens in airports, schools, you name it. And the south side of Chicago, those residents are fed up. We've seen some organic pushback and protests. We need to see a lot more of that if we are going to hope to get these politicians to act in America's interests.
Carrie, reflecting on the broader socioeconomic impact, how do you believe immigration and border security policies affect the U.S. economy and its social fabric?
It has a huge impact. And in fact, I'm going to quote or paraphrase from a report from the Obama Department of Justice, from the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. They issued a report, again, in the Obama administration, the second term, and they researched the economic impacts of illegal immigration on U.S. citizens, and they found a pronounced impact that was negative. It was most negative for lower educated high school or high school dropout Black men. And they were the most hurt. They talked about industries that were manual labor. We're talking things like the meat packing or construction, things that require physical labor, that when you have illegal immigration coming across the border, they're willing to work for wages that outprice and outbid U.S. citizens, and it predominantly hurts Black Americans. And so it's a huge economic issue. And that's what is so insulting when you have Joe Biden saying, oh, if you don't vote for me, you ain't Black. It's like, oh, you want us to vote for you to take away our jobs, our ability to feed our families, our ability to have dignity instead of being on government programs? But that's what Joe Biden wants. I mean, that's part of the program, is he wants to get as many people as possible dependent on government, both illegal and illegal, and also U.S. citizens. And that is the collapse of a society when we already have $34 trillion in debt. Our debt to GDP ratio has not been this high since World War II. Well, what was happening in World War II? We had an existential threat with the Nazis and the Japanese trying to take over the world. We're not in this place. We are in a much more stable place in terms of our U.S. threat level. And yet this is happening again from within. This is an internal immolation. And I blame Congress. Lora's right. Congress has totally punted on this. I'm disappointed in Speaker Johnson. He needs to do better.
How do we survive this? It's such a crisis. At so many levels.
It is. Whether it's the national security threat, terrorists we've let in, it's the foreign enemies who wish to exploit it. I mean, when will China invade Taiwan? That window's closing with Joe Biden in office this term, let alone, Ukraine, Russia, Iran, et cetera. There's just so many factors working against us right now, and that's why we need the American people to be very vocal. We need to see that organic pushback, whether it's New Yorkers or Chicago's, spread across the country, and tell these politicians, you will be affected by this, because politicians they won't change unless their power is threatened, their pocketbook, or personal safety.
Sal, man, can you imagine the resources that are being impacted by this flow of illegals in this country? I mean, we really have no idea what the true cost is, not just in terms of money and the resources, but human cost. Because like you said, a lot of these statistics, especially in these liberal jurisdictions, they just don't want you to know what the consequences are, what the true price their citizens are paying. They just don't want you to know.
Yeah, I just, wasn't it recently, I think it was in Chicago, they said that illegals or undocumenteds are allowed to have a firearm? I saw a case where that happened, where the court and the justice at the court actually said, oh, no, the undocumented are allowed to carry a firearm, but you aren't. So I want to know, I mean, how does that work in Chicago? It's like, I don't know what it is. I don't know what kind of agenda they have, where they want to, mass, they want all these undocumented in the country. But, going back to what Lora said, the problem is going to be under a Trump administration that have mass deportations. Now, Armstrong, we're already stretched thin financially because we're aiding all these countries. And, I think this would be something that bankrupts the country to even try a mass deportation, because you're talking at least 30 or 40 million undocumented here. How do you don't even have enough law enforcement apparatus to try to reel these people in. So I don't even know what the strategy would be. You would like to see self-deportations, and we could stop the ones that come in once Trump is in office. We go back to remain in Mexico. But the 30 or 40 million that are here that we don't even know really where they are or who they are, how do we go about mass deportations? Because that could really break the country's back financially for good. We do not have the resources to try to deport all these people all at once. We really don't. If you really look at it, I'm sure we don't.
Your final thoughts?
Well, we don't have to deport all of them all at once, but once you start, it sends the message, and the risk calculus changes, and people won't come. If they can't work here, then they will go elsewhere. I could tell you there's plenty of waste spent within DHS, so it's going to take a lot of shifting of money, but there are a lot of pots of money that you can take from and direct it towards ICE and to CBP to start enforcing the law, and then duplicate that in other departments as well.
Well, there's one thing that's a fact here. We care. We have common sense. It's America first, definitely not America last. I want to thank all our guests, Leonard Snipes, Sal Greco, Carrie, Sheffield, Lora, Ries. It's always a pleasure. I really appreciate your expertise on this. But more importantly, I love the fact that you still love our country. Patriots. I appreciate our fellow patriots. Thank you so much for joining us, and you love this country too. But we need some change. Quickly, we need some change. And it must come from you at the voting booth. I'm out of here.